Happy New Year, everyone. Happy 2018. We are here for the 33rd Automation Hour webinar. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. If you have questions about Doug's presentation or any process automation questions in general, use the chat function, and if we don't get to your question today, we will continue the discussion on the Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour. We will be posting a recording of this along with the deck after the session, and you'll find that on our website, automationhour.com. We'll also post that to the Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour, as well as communicate that out via Twitter. So Doug will be presenting as part of the advanced series that is a carryover from last year. And Francis next week, I'm sorry, not next week, the 19th will be closing out that series. And we have several really cool speakers lined up for going into June of this year. And I do want to give a special shout out for the session that we have scheduled for February 16th. We were able to secure the Salesforce product manager for process automation, Alex Edelson, and he will be presenting the upcoming process automation enhancements going in spring 18. So he'll be demoing that, and then after the session, you can go into your sandboxes and play around with all the cool functionality that Spring 18 will bring. And if you have a cool process automation solution that you would like to come on and share with the Salesforce community, definitely we encourage you to submit your idea and we will be in contact. And we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io, for continuing to support this free online webinar series. And here are your co-hosts. I have David on with me. Rakesh is traveling back to India, so he will not be joining our session today. And with that, I want to hand it over to Doug. Doug is coming back as a third-time presenter on Automation Hour, and he's a fellow MVP as well. And I know folks are eager to learn more about this mass action scheduler that he has. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Doug.
Thank you, Jennifer. Glad to be here. And I won't spend any time talking about myself. We'll just jump right on into it. So what is Mass Action Scheduler? Well, it's a free open source app that I've developed using the Salesforce Actions API. It allows you to declaratively schedule actions to process records. No Apex or SOQL is necessary. You can use reports and list views to identify what records that you want to have processed, and then use the configuration declarative features of Salesforce, like workflow rules, process builder, etc., to do something on those records. Okay? So before we jump into a demo, I'm going to kind of go over what actions are supported, a couple different use cases, and then we'll dive in. First up, workflow rules are supported. These are active rules whose rule criteria match the records that you want to process. So the records in your report or list view, if they meet the rule criteria, then the active rules that would apply to that object or those records will run. The evaluation criteria, created every time it's edited, these are not applicable. This doesn't matter. These are ignored when using Mass Action Scheduler, because we are explicitly saying, Salesforce, evaluate the rules anyways. So it's only the rule criteria that matters and that they are an active rule. This is pretty neat if, let's say you introduced a new workflow rule, but you have all your existing records, right? You want to backfill or have the rule apply to those existing records, we can use the app to identify the records with the report list view and then just rerun without having to export the data or anything like that. By extension, email alerts are also supported. So you could do kind of a email marketing or campaign management this way. Think about sending regular email alerts either weekly or monthly, identified by any contacts, leads, or other email fields that you can pull up through reports and list views. Quick actions. You may have not thought about quick actions in this way for process automation, but they're a pretty cool tool with the Mass Action Scheduler app. 3 types of quick actions are supported: create a record, update record, and log a call. Normally, when we create quick actions, we're designing them to add to our page layouts. In classic UI, you would see these in the chatter composer. In Lightning Experience, they show up as buttons on the record detail page. And we use the create record quick action to kind of help our users facilitate creating child records, make that process a little easier, simpler. And the same thing with update record actions. It's a way that we can provide users a quick edit form, right, without looking at all 20, 30, 40 fields that may be on your page layout. In the context of Mass Action Scheduler, these are ways that we can automate the creation of records without resorting to Process Builder or Flow. And then what I really like and enjoy is the update record quick action, because it's a way to assign or apply mass field updates to your records. You can completely bypass data loader, not having to export records or load them back. And it can apply to as many records as your report and list view are, finding. So you can kind of like set it up, fire, and forget, because everything's happening on Salesforce. You don't have to export any of the data. And we'll walk through an example of using the quick actions, and I'll get into this a little bit more later in the demo. Apex. Even though we don't have to write Apex, for the developers in the audience, making use of invocable classes, those that have the invocable method annotation, can greatly simplify your batch scheduling needs. All you need to do is provide the invocable Apex class. You don't need to implement the batch interface or the scheduler interface. You don't have to worry about creating test code that tests that part of the framework, that boilerplate. You can stay very focused, laser focused on your business logic. There's also added benefits of having your logic here in the invocable class, because Process Builder and Flow can also call this invocable, the invocable logic here. So you get a lot of reuse out of it. Easier to test, less code that you have to write and manage, makes it much simpler and easier to schedule. Now, one of the use cases probably everyone has is, well, I want to schedule or force my flows to run without having to update my records. Flows that do not have screens, also known as auto-launched flows, are supported. If it has a screen, then we can't fire it off in the background because the screen requires user input. But without screens, we can totally do that. Another way to think about it are any of the flows that you've launched from Process Builder would also be supported. The input variables that you define in your flow will be exposed and available to you on the configuration page if you want to map fields from your list view or report into your flow. And then Process Builder, probably one of the more fun ones to do. Now the processes that are supported are those that start when it's invoked by another process, also known as invocable processes. I want to make the distinction here. This is different than processes that start when a record changes, such as when an account gets created or the context being updated. Okay, so 2 different scenarios here. Now, after hearing that distinction, if your emotions went from, this is amazing, to, hold up, Doug, what do I do about my existing processes? I had all these great use cases for rerunning my existing investment in Process Builder. What can I do about that? Well, Let's talk about that before we jump into the demo. So I want to assuage any concerns or fears here. One of the design options that you can do is to move the logic from your existing processes that start when records are changed and start to put that into the reusable invocable processes. Now, to get a little more detail and understanding what all that means, how would you do it? Jennifer Lee has a wonderful post on her blog about dry processes. Don't repeat yourself. And she goes into all that in the wonderful detail that she always does. So definitely check that out. Now, if you're not wanting to refactor or change your existing processes significantly, you don't want to introduce invocable processes, we can still leverage your existing investment. You would do this the same way you would try and cause any of your existing processes to fire today. We will need to schedule a record update, and you may or may not need to modify your decision criteria such that the records, when certain field updates are occurring, they will run. Now, as we'll see in the demo, it's going to be very easy to schedule and cause these field updates to occur. So it should still be seamless to get even your existing processes that are not invocable per se to still be automated. All right, so hopefully we're all back to the excitement of this is amazing. Enough talk, Doug. Show it to me. All right. Now, it said the project is open source and it's hosted here on GitHub. When you come to the project page, you can scroll down and read through some of the instructions and all that fun stuff. But I definitely recommend starting at the wiki tab. And here I've got some links to go over the setup instructions, links to install the app, what you need to be thinking about to get started. I also have some documented examples and walkthrough tutorials, and then some frequently asked questions. In the demo that I'm about to start, we'll go through the prerequisites and then show a few of those examples. Now, I do want to call out, you do need to have Lightning Experience enabled in the org when you go to install the app. You do not have to have it rolled out to your users yet. Your org doesn't have to be using Lightning Experience, but as the admin, you will need to toggle into Lightning Experience to use the Lightning component for the configuration wizard. And then because we are using Lightning components, we will need you to enable and deploy My Domain to your org. And that's also just a best practice around security with your org as well, and it opens doors to other features. So go ahead and think about enabling and deploying My Domain. Now, to do both of these is very well documented, and Trailhead walks you through it. So I haven't rehashed any of that here, but it's really easy to do. And if you're using a Trailhead playground or a Salesforce DX Scratch org, know that Lightning Experience and My Domain has already been enabled in those orgs, so you can probably skip the first two prerequisites if you're using one of those environments. And then the next three steps only take a couple minutes to do, but it may be terminology that you're unfamiliar with, but I'm going to walk you through it here in the demo to see how easy it is. It's nothing to be afraid of. We're going to need to create a connected app, an auth provider, and a named credential. We do this so that we can securely store your credentials of your user or whichever user you want to set up as the context user for these actions that are going to be scheduled and run in the background. If you think about if you've used Data Loader or other services that connect to Salesforce, you're always prompted for a username and password. And that's because they need that information so that they can connect to the Salesforce API on your behalf. We're doing the same thing with the Mass Action Scheduler app, but I don't want to store your username and password insecurely in plain text on the records or where someone could maybe get to them maliciously. We're going to use named credentials. That's Salesforce's recommended way and approach. You only need to get this set up once and then we're off to the races. I just want to bring that up. If you do have issues when you get the app installed, you've gone through these steps and you're having issues getting the scheduler to run or the configuration to run, it's usually an issue with one of these 5 steps. And so we're going to go through all that, and then we'll be good. I just wanted to call that out. All right, so let's jump into our org. In my org at the moment, I have Lightning Experience turned on. I've flipped over to it. I have my domain deployed, and I have the app installed, and I've assigned myself the permission set, Mass Action Admin. At this point, I need to do the last 3 steps of setup: create a connected app, auth provider, and named credential. To create my connected app, in setup, I'm going to search for App Manager. I'm going to click New Connected App. And here I can give it any fun name that I want to use. I'm going to call this Automation Hour, just so I can find it really easily. And then you can put your email address. And then we're going to scroll down and we're going to check Enable OAuth Settings. 2 fields we need to set up. In the callback URL, we just need to put a placeholder here. We need to type in https://localhost.com. We will come back and change this in the second step, but we do need this placeholder initially to save this record. For the OAuth scopes, this is defining when we use our named credential to connect to Salesforce, what access and powers should that user have. I recommend setting up full access, but you can play around with different ones, but probably to rule out any issues, full access would be good. Then we can just scroll down and click Save. We're going to disregard this for the moment because we're going to come back and have to edit the app again, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So now I've got my connected app. Next, I need to create my auth provider. So over here, I'm going to search for auth. Now I'm going to open auth provider in a new tab because I'm going to toggle back to the connected app with information from the auth provider. Create my new auth provider. The authentication provider type is going to be Salesforce, and I'll give it a name. I'm just going to call mine Automation Hour. And then I need to copy the consumer key and secret from my connected app. I'll scroll down. My consumer key is right here. It's a big, long string. Copy that. Paste here. And then we need to grab one more value, the consumer secret. You'll click to reveal. Copy this. Paste that here. And then we will click Save. So you see, although we're having to jump around a couple different places in setup, these records that we need to create are very simple. So only a couple fields we need to fill out each time. Now, when we saved our auth provider, it created a URL down here called the callback URL. We want to copy this and then use that. Oh, got stuck. Copy the callback URL back into the connected app. So edit, and I'm going to replace that local host placeholder URL. There we go. Click Save. Now, this red warning is just letting you know this configuration does take up to 10 minutes to kind of propagate and be available. Which means if you go and start to set up your named credential and authenticate there before the full, before the 2 to 10 minutes is up, you might get an authentication error. That's to be expected until at least after the 10 minutes. So this may be a good stop and you go get a coffee or something, but I don't know why it takes that long, but sometimes it does. So we're done with our auth provider. We're done with the connected app. The third step is to go create our named credential. Create new named credential. Anyone guess what I'm going to call it? Automation Hour. Now, it wants a URL. This is a very finicky URL that we need to play with. It needs to be the my domain URL of your org. Now, in Lightning experience, you can see that I have the my domain piece here, but then it ends with lightning.force.com. This is not what we want. It will not work. But if you flip back to your auth provider page, the URL we do want is part of this single logout URL. So we can copy all of this up to the salesforce.com. Okay, so you just want the front part, .my.salesforce.com. Go back to our named credential and paste that here. You want this specific URL because it has the my domain. It also has your Salesforce instance if you're a sandbox. It won't have it if it's a production or developer org. And then .my.salesforce.com. The last part, which is also documented in the instructions, is to type on /services/data/v41.0. This is telling the name credential what version of the Salesforce API we're going to be using. Next, change the identity type to named principal. Authentication protocol will be OAuth. There's a lot of techie jargon, but it's we're just trying to connect the dots here with a couple of different things. The authentication provider will be automation hour, and then for the scope, we need to little zoom won't work again. Type in full space, okay, space, refresh underscore token. This sometimes stings people. They might put an underscore here, or they might have a space over there, but it's full, then a space, refresh underscore token. And then check the box for start authentication flow on save. And we'll click save. At this point, Salesforce will prompt us to provide the username and password that we want to associate with this named credential. This is the point where you're saying, hey, Mass Action Scheduler, this is the username and password that I want to use. Or this is your password vault. And you're saying, this is the username and password. Keep it secret, keep it safe. Okay, so I'm going to copy the username I'm using for this org. Put in my password. It's going to ask, do you want to allow access? Of course we do. Okay. And if it worked, then you'll see the authentication status say authenticated as and the username you provided. Okay, so now we've securely stored that username and password in Salesforce under a named credential called automation hour. Perfect. Now we're ready to get started. We can flip over to the app and start thinking about, all right, what solutions do we want to do? Now, the first example that I have up is I want to automate adding contacts from a report that don't belong to a campaign. And maybe I want to schedule this to run, weekly, daily, whatever. And then we'll follow up on that example of saying, well, now I want to have contacts removed from that campaign if they meet different criteria. So we'll have two drivers, one that's trying to add people to a campaign, and then another one that's maybe removing people. Maybe these are folks that have opted out, and so you want to remove them from the campaign so that they're not getting, e-blasts or things of that nature. For this example, we first need to have our campaign, and I have one here, my campaign. And so sad, it has no campaign members, but we will fix that. Then we do have some contacts. I have 3 contacts in this org. So I need to create a report that will pull them back. So we'll create a contact report. We'll say, let's grab all of them because there's only 3. Now this is a lot of columns. I don't care about all those, so I'm going to remove them. One column that I need to have in my report is the unique identifier. So I am going to add the contact ID. And then for fun, we'll go ahead and add the first name and last name. Now, this is just pulling back all the contacts. I only want contacts that don't belong to the campaign that I'm using. I can have that advanced filter by using what's called a cross filter. So this is going to say contacts without campaign history. Well, okay, this is telling us which campaigns that they belong to. Now, there's a bug with the reports, at least in Lightning. If I try and filter this by a campaign ID, it doesn't work. It complains all day long. But I can filter it by name. Or maybe you can create an auto number on your campaign object and reference that instead of the name. But something unique. All right, cool. Now, these contacts didn't belong to that campaign. We saw it didn't have any members, so we have 3 people in this report. And we'll call this add contacts to my campaign. In order for Mass Action Scheduler to see your report, you need to save it in an actual folder. So not the standard personal reports or the unfiled reports, but go ahead and create a separate folder. Even if it's only accessible to you, it just needs to be in a folder. Cool. We save that, we run. So we have our report that defines what our records are, but now we need to define what's that action. What are we going to do? We're going to create our process. Create a new process here. Call this add context to my campaign process. And this is going to run, and we talked about different scenarios, not when a record changes, but when it's invoked by another process. Save. What objects does this work off of? We're going to be sending it contacts. And what criteria? Now, I could add extra criteria here, but my criteria is already defined in my report or list view, so I don't need any extra criteria here, although you could if you wanted. And then I have one immediate action. What do we want to do? We want to create a record. We're going to create a campaign member. Campaign member, okay. I need to fill out a couple fields. Now, it needs to know the campaign ID, and I am Jen, cover your ears. I'm going to hard code it. I didn't do it, I swear. And the contact that we're going to refer to is the one that's being passed into Process Builder. So we'll choose a reference, contact ID. Now, even though I've hard coded this here for the simplicity of the demo, I do recommend that you store this in, say, a custom hierarchy setting, a custom label, maybe custom metadata types when they're supported, or instead of calling Process Builder, call a flow and it can look it up dynamically that way. And then we'll set what's our campaign status going to be. We'll say send. Activate our process. Cool. So we have all that ready. We'll come back. Now we're ready to create our configuration. So I'm on the Mass Action Configurations tab. I'll click New. And here's our wizard. What do we want to call it? I want to call it Add Context to My Campaign. Where's the data coming from? It's coming from a report. Which report? It's coming from the My Contact Campaign Reports folder. Pick my report, and then pick the column that uniquely identifies the records. I'm going to choose Contact ID. If you weren't sure if this was the right report or list view, you can click this link. It'll pop it open for you. You can do a sanity check. Yep, that looks cool. Then we'll click Next. This is where we need to specify that named credential that we created in the beginning, because this is going to define the credentials for how we communicate with the Salesforce API. So we'll choose the automation hour one that we set up. I want to run what action type? Process Builder. Okay, which one? The add contacts to my campaign process. Come to our field mappings. Process Builder just needs to know the ID of the record. And so we're going to pick that from the report. Again, another reason to have the contact ID in there. Then click Next. And one thing back here on the field mappings that I want to point out, even though Process Builder needs an ID, a record ID, the report doesn't have to be a report on the same object as the process or the action that you're running. It just needs to have the ID of the object that you want. So this could have been a report on a different object, but as long as it knew of a contact ID somewhere, a lookup field or something, then that would work. Then we have our scheduling options. The simplest one is manual. You just save it and it only runs when we tell it to explicitly. There's a simple scheduler at the moment where you can pick the specific times of day, which days of the week, and then which months of the year that you want this to run. Maybe you want it to run only in December or something like that. If you need something more customized, at the moment, you would need to provide your own cron expression. These look really weird. They got numbers and asterisks and things like that in it. And there's documentation here that explains how you come up with those. But in future releases, the simple scheduler will get better. But at least those are your routes at the moment. We'll click manual and save. Okay, we can see that this is active, which means if we run it manually or scheduled, then it'll actually do something. If it was inactive, then it would not do anything. And behind the scenes, because we're going to take, your report might have 10,000 records in it, or the list view refers to 100,000 records, we need to batch them together or into smaller chunks. If you click on the quick edit screen here, this quick action here, then you can quickly toggle on and off whether you want this to be enabled, but you can also change what your batch size is going to be. Maybe 200 records is too much. Maybe you need it to go down to 10 or 100 or whatever you need. Okay. Then we click the run. Confirm that you want this to run. We do. And this gives us the Apex job that just got fired off to run in the background. And so it took all the data from our report and passed it to our process builder. And let's flip back to look at our campaign. And we should now see, we've got our contacts. Yay! There to be. And if we go to our report, should not have any contacts in there anymore. Remember, because of our criteria, only contacts that are not a part of that campaign. So they dynamically fell off their report as they were added to that campaign. Now, maybe we want to delete contacts from the campaign, right? They get opted out or this, that, the other. So how would we do that? Now with contacts, this time I'm going to do it with a list view. So if we jump over to our contacts tab, and we'll say, ooh, here's the one, all contacts. All right, cool, we got our name, counts, perfect. You could add more criteria, of course. For now, I'm just pulling back all the contacts. And then we need something that can delete campaign members. Now, Process Builder can't do deletes yet, but Flow can. And Flow to delete records is very, very, very easy. It just needs one element. So we'll come in here to New Flow. And we're going to add an input variable so we know what campaign member we want to delete. And then we'll have a delete element. So under Resources, we'll create a variable. I'm going to call this my campaign member ID. I need to change the input-output type to input so that it will be exposed to the Mass Action Scheduler app. Click OK. Then on the palette, we're going to look for a delete, record delete. What are we going to do here? We are going to delete campaign members. And what object? Of course, campaign member. But which one, Doug? Which one? The ones whose ID equals campaign member ID. Oh, I just thought of something. I'm not going to do this with a contact list view. I'm going to need to do this with a campaign member report. And then we need to set this as the start element by clicking the green button. And then we'll save our flow as delete campaign members from my campaign. I'll put flow. Since flows and process builders show up in that same list, I always put a suffix So I know, oh, this is specifically calling my process builder, or it's specifically calling my flow. We'll click OK. Yes, yes, yes. I know there's only one step. It's all good. We'll click close. Now, where's the place? All right, let's go create a report. We need to identify all those campaign members, right? Campaign. There it is. Campaigns with campaign members. I went blind there for a second. Say, sure, all campaigns. Sounds good. Or we could select a campaign. I'm going to select my campaign. So it's already filtered down to those members. I don't need all these columns. But what I do need is that member ID, so I can pass that to the flow. And then, sure, why not we just add the name for grins. And we can save this. We'll say delete members from my campaign, store that in my report folder. We'll save that. So now I've identified the records that I want to process. We've got the flow that will do the action, which will delete the members from the campaign. Now we just need to tie them together with our configuration. So we'll create a new configuration here. Delete members from my campaign. What's our source type? Again, it's a report. It's coming from our contact campaign reports folder. It's my delete members from campaign report. My unique identifier, the field, this one here, this is always the unique identifier of the records in the report. It may or may not be, although coincidentally it is in both of these examples, it's also the field that I'm using in my field mappings. But this field here is the unique identifier in the report. You don't get prompted for that with list views, but it is important for reports. Click next. What's our automation hour? So what, not our automation hour, our named credential. Who is the user that this is going to be acting on as? Process builder and flows for our type, and then we'll choose our, Doug did not activate his flow. The joys of live demos. I don't know if that's going to pick it back up. Oh, it did. So just refresh the list. All right, now what's going to go into my input variable that was declared in my flow? I'm going to map the member ID to it. Click next. Again, we have all the same scheduling options. I'm going to choose manual for the demo. And then we'll run. Of course, we want it to run. There's the job ID. And take a quick second here. If you go into setup, if you wanted to get real nerdy, you can navigate to Apex Jobs. And then on this page, you can do a search for the 15 character ID. And there's our job. So it ran a total of one batch because there's only 3 records, no errors. Awesome. So we'll go back to our campaign. And we have no campaign members. They all got wiped out. And so we go back to our add contacts to my campaign report. The contacts should now, boom, they've magically come back because they now don't belong to that campaign. Cool. Now for the next demo, I want to show the power of the quick actions, of how we can use those to apply mass updates to our records without needing to use data alert. We're not going to have to export records. We're not going to have to import records. More importantly, we're not going to have to sit there with our computer tied up as that job, crunches along, and then inevitably, you're at Starbucks or something, or at your home, or your internet drops out, and then you got to restart. Who wants all that mess? I don't. So we'll come to our accounts tab here, and I've got a list view. So this time we'll do an example with a list view. I've got a couple accounts here, Salesforce, Trailhead, and oh no, they have blank type. Or whatever your field update needs are that you want to mass assign something and that sort of thing. I'm going to take a little sip. Sorry. And of course, yes, in our list view, we could, mass update via here, check a few fields, click save, but that's only good for maybe a couple fields and a handful of records. I don't want to do that across 100 records, 10,000 records, and I don't want to do that if I have a lot of fields to update either, right? That's no fun. Very powerful inline editing with list view, but that's not my use case. So what do I need to do? I want to use a quick action to define the field changes that I want. Now, not only are we going to do this for the use case of, oh, I've got all these records and fields that I want to change, this is also that second design technique for how you can have Mass Action Scheduler kick off your existing processes that are designed to run when a record is created or updated. Because we can use this quick action, this update record action, to update the field that you're monitoring. Okay. So we'll create a new action, and I'm going to choose update record. It's going to update the account that we pass in the ID for in our field mappings. And then what's our label going to be? I'm just going to call this field updates. No, it's got to be called automation hour. No, I already wrote in field updates. Too late now. Click save. Now, the quick action, again, the original design intent for these was to present a form, a little modal screen to the user for a simpler page layout than maybe your full page layout is. And here's just a few fields to change. Maybe it's a change status quick action, or add comments to a case quick action, something like that. In the context of Mass Action Scheduler, this is the input variables. This is like with Flow, where we declared input variables. These are fields that you'll be able to map data from your reporter list view into here and have those values from the reporter list view assigned to update this record. So you may have, say, a report on some object X, and or let's say, for whatever crazy reason, you have contacts and there's data on the contacts, and you want that data to flow up to the parent account for some reason. Maybe you want to sync addresses from contacts up to accounts. Then I may have a list view or report of contacts, and I want to have on here address fields. Okay, and then in my reporter list view, I may have contact those address fields and map it into the quick action here. And then I would map the account ID from the contact or something onto the account that way. Anyways, in this example, we're just going to be, in fact, we're not even going to have any inputs. I don't want to map anything. I'm just going to save it with a blank layout. But what I do want to use are these predefined field values. So this is, in your head, you can think, okay, if I had exported with data loader the data, the CSV file to my computer, and I pulled that up in my spreadsheet program, what am I doing in that spreadsheet program? You might be assigning, say, the type, and we want to assign it to the value of prospect. Like, cool. And so now I've got my predefined value here. Or maybe you had, we want to do something fun. We want to transform the account name. And I've got this formula editor. So I can do all sorts of different transformations here, all these fun little functions. Maybe I want to uppercase the account name. So I'll use the upper function, and then I'm going to insert my account name. Okay. And then we'll click save. And so now if I run records through this action, it will uppercase the name and change the type to prospect. Now at this point, the quick action just exists. I do not need to do anything else with it. I don't need to add it to my page layouts. I don't need to expose it to users. It's only here for the purposes of having my mass action configuration run it. In fact, once you get done with that data job, that change, you can either come back and delete this, or you can just keep repurposing the fields here, or maybe have different types associated with different configurations, depending on how often you need to run these jobs. Okay. So we need to have our list view for our accounts. We'll just use this all accounts list view so that when we come back and refresh, we'll see the transformations that occur. And we'll come back here. We're going to create our third one. Let's say update accounts with quick action. The records are going to be identified through a list view. Okay, what object, account, which list view? The all accounts one. What do we want to do? Using the automation hour named Credential, I would like to run a quick action. On what object? The account, please. And I want to run my field updates action. What would be cool is if there was a way for me to know what kind of quick action that was. I don't know if I can, but that might be nice. Here, what's the record that we're going to run through? In my list view, I have account ID. We'll just choose manual for now. And then we'll click run. All right, now let's come back. Let's see what happened to our accounts. Aha, they indeed have been updated. Type changed to prospect, and the names have been transformed to uppercase. And I didn't have to export the data. I didn't have to use data loader to re-import the data. I didn't even have to navigate to the records to have this change occur. It just, boom, magic. I love it. All right. Couple last things, and then we'll open it up for questions. We're getting close to the end of the hour. If there is an error, like what happens if things go wrong? There's a couple places that you can look. If it's an error with the tool itself, with the app trying to call your action, if it has a problem invoking your process, invoking your flow, invoking your quick action, if it has a problem getting started, that's going to be reported here under the mass action logs. This is really just a convenient object so that you don't have to go navigate to the Apex jobs page. Do I have any that had an error recently? No. If there was an error, then there's a status here that will display like what happened, but it's more of the mechanics kind of an error. It hadn't updated your records yet, that kind of an error. It's the machine couldn't work for some reason. And that'll get reported here. And I have it as a custom object for a couple of reasons. One, for visibility, you can see it here. But secondly, you could set up your own process builder and email alerts to let you know that something like this, bombed out or something. And if it has a problem, starting the process builder, starting the flow, go back and double check, is your named credential still created correctly? Do you need to recreate that for some reason? Is the process or flow, are they still active? Is there a misconception of something with the inputs, the input variables, or the way that those things could start? Now, if your action did get called, so the tool said, here, process builder, here's the record ID, love Doug, love Jennifer, whatever, boom, fire and forget. If the process builder itself fails, the flow fails, it gets like the third step and something fails, validation rule rejected the change. Those errors are going to get reported through Salesforce's own system notifications for process builders and flows. You're going to get that email with all the steps that happened, and as the administrator, you'll get maybe a cryptic error email about validation rules rejected it or something like that. So the extra thing that I would encourage you to do is make sure here in setup, although we don't need to do anything about Apex, but come to this Apex exception email and make sure to either add your email address or add your user here so that you will get a notification behind the scenes that something happened. Because all this is happening in the background, you're not directly interacting with it. So you're looking for ways to get proactively notified of an error. Okay. With that, I'll hush up. David, Jen, are there any questions or things that we need to go over?
So there are plenty of questions. A lot of interest. Okay, first question is, hold on. First question is from Mo. So this is basically like a batch apex.
Is the question, is this like batch apex?
Yes.
Yes, underneath the sheets, the app has a batch apex class that queries for the records from your list view or report. And then for each batch execution of your desired batch size, so if you want 200 records at a time, 10 at a time, that will get passed to your the flow or process builder or that sort of thing. Now, each flow isn't going to be handed like 200 IDs at the same time. Like 200 invocations of your flow get kicked off, and because that's part of the same kind of request, Salesforce behind the scenes is kind of like should be bulkifying those calls together. That came out in a few releases ago. But underneath the sheets, yes, it's batch apex calling the Actions API.
Okay. Blanca's question is, Vicky is very helpful. Thank you for taking the time. Hers was just a comment. Corey asked, what about the my domain requirement for sandboxes?
I'm not sure what the question is, but my domain is required. So I would make sure if it hasn't been deployed in your sandbox, go ahead and deploy it there, or go ahead and enable it in production, my domain, and then refresh your sandbox. Or try it out in a Trailhead org that already has it. If there's more to that question, if I'm not answering that, please make sure to ask it on the Trailblazer community @mention me so I can kind of follow up with you.
Matt, I think this is more of a comment. It's probably best to use an integration user if you have something like that set up, something where the password never expires.
Yep, that's a good one.
You could conceivably turn on Lightning just for the user being used to authenticate, and then turn on my domain with very loose requirements, right? If, for example, you have an old org that won't be moving to Lightning anytime soon. Is that true?
You can have Lightning enabled and assigned just to your user or whoever the admin is that's going to be clicking around like I am. And then with my domain, when you've deployed it, there's a login policy here. Do you want to prevent people from going to the non-my domain URL? You do not have to have that checked. You don't even have to have any redirections occur. For the majority of users, they don't even have to know that it happened unless you want to restrict it, okay? But the fact that this is here is what we need. But your users would still be able to navigate to login.salesforce.com or test.salesforce.com, or just looking for a place where I can type na34.salesforce.com. Those URLs will still work for your users, but we just want this to be available. It have been deployed so that in our named credential, we've got that wired up. And that's also a requirement for Lightning components, just general security for those sorts of things. Good question.
Okay, comment by Matt. I know Doug posted this on Ideas, but does anyone know if Salesforce is building their own version of this concept? We'll, I guess, have to take that offline.
Yeah, I guess safe harbor. The Dreamforce what was it? It's not this year. A couple months ago, there was a presentation talking about things coming up, new APIs, whatnot, bulk API version 2, and then for a couple seconds, they mention the concept they're building out a mass actions API, something along the lines of being able to apply like mass field updates to records in your list view, right? Other than that, I don't know what more they're doing. I'm trying to get a hold of their product managers so I can see how this app can work with it, complement it, or maybe I should stop investing in it if they're about to roll out their own awesome tool. That's all I know.
Okay, the next question is from Bruce. Is Doug only connecting to his org? Is Doug only connecting his org to the app he has installed in his org or to some generally other endpoint?
This is 100% Salesforce. I'm not using any external services like Heroku or a third-party app. The only reason we need the named credential is because we already talked about behind the scenes. This is a scheduled job. I am using batch Apex, and so that runs in the background. When Apex runs in the background, it does not have a valid session ID to call the Salesforce API. So because it doesn't have a valid session ID, even though it knows who the context user is, it knows it's Susie who kicked this off, or it knows it was Doug, it does not have a valid session ID to call the API. So we need something that can re-authenticate with Salesforce. And the named credential is like your password manager. It's like LastPass or something like that. And we've got it securely holding your username and password so that when the Apex code in the background says, hey, we need to take these records from this report and pass them to Process Builder, because that uses the Actions API that Salesforce developed. I can authenticate to that API without you having to physically be there and interact with it. If you've used Data Loader and you want to log in and export or import the records, it's asking you, hey, right now, right this second, what is your username and password? And like, well, you're not going to be there, so we have to store it off over here. But that's the only reason that you create it. It's not being passed outside of Salesforce to anything. It's just so we can authenticate in the background. Good question.
All right, Natalie has a question, and just for those on the call, we're going to go a few minutes over because of the sheer volume of questions. So Natalie's question is, if you add a criteria to the process builder and it conflicts with the records in the report, will it only update records that meet the criteria?
Correct. Well, it depends on how you're running the process builder and your report, right? I'm going to pull up my presentation for a second. If we go back to here, there's two ways that your process builders can get invoked. Let's come back to actually this screen. If your process starts when it's invoked by another process, then correct, no changes will occur to your records if the criteria, the decision criteria in the process would exclude records from your report or list view. It just doesn't meet the criteria, so your process builder doesn't do anything. So those records essentially just, we called them up, we brought them, we said, asked them questions, they didn't answer correctly, so we said, nice seeing you, go away. If, on the other hand, you're trying to have process builder fire because record changes, so in the example, the last demo, I used a quick action to update my accounts. Well, that's physically causing an update to the account, so they're going to get edited regardless. Hopefully that's answering the question. If we need more clarity, please hit me up on the Trailblazer community and we can talk through that some more.
Okay, Alicia asks, can it be manually invoked from a classic report view?
Yes, although my entire demo was done through Lightning experience, the only piece that needs Lightning is this page, specifically this configure tab. Okay, this is a Lightning component and it's only supported in Lightning experience. Once you've wired this up, you are free to go back to Classic. You can use Classic to create your list views, Classic to create your reports, Classic to create, process builder, all that fun stuff. The only requirement for Lightning is this configure tab. Since we're talking about the configure tab, I only recommend, and it's only supported, that you create or edit these configuration records using this tab. Even though at the end of the day, behind the scenes, all the data is stored on an object, and you might think, oh, I'll just tweak some of the data, particularly if you try and tweak some of the schedule information, it may not work. You may cause your configuration to become unusable. That doesn't affect your actual business data. It just means this configuration may have to get deleted and recreated. But as long as you're using the configure tab, you'll be good. And you have to be in Lightning to use the configure tab. I tried to add classic support. It wasn't going to happen. It was not playing nice. Sorry.
Okay, Matt asks, are there any known limitations? Is it creating a scheduled Apex job?
Yes, unfortunately, we don't live in the land of unlimitedness. You are bound by the same governor limits for the number of scheduled jobs that you can create if you are choosing to schedule your configuration. If it's manual mode, then of course that's not using a scheduled job. And then we come back over to the project page. There are some limits between reports and list views. So if you have a report, this is a limitation of the analytics API. This is only good for less than 14,000 records. Once you get close to that number, then Salesforce starts rejecting the request to grab the next set of records. So if it was a 50,000 record report, it will bomb out around that 13 to 14,000 number limit. There's nothing I can really do about that. But you might want to use reports if you've got less than that many records and you need some advanced filtering like cross filters. List views, on the other hand, they have simple filtering. You can only apply criteria for the fields that are on the object, but you're only limited by the amount of records that a batch Apex class can pull back, because the list view gives me the actual SOQL query. I don't have to do anything fancy there. I just run the query, and as many records as Salesforce will let me pull back, then we're good. Good question.
Okay, next question is from Matt. It would be nice if there was a reference of which methodologies to use when. For example, what does using a quick action allow us to do that we could not do with process or flow? When would we use a list view? So that's just feedback.
Yeah. So this one hopefully helps explain when to use list views or reports. The one about when to use which action and trick of the trade, a little bit of experience, but I'll think about trying to come up with things that the way I might approach things. But as you all come up with more use cases, definitely feel free to recommend, and definitely on the Trailblazer community, throw out ideas there of how you might want things to be queued up.
Okay, how does this work with SOQL limits? How many records can I update max? Suppose I had 150,000 accounts, which I wanted to update via a report.
Yep. So since it's using batch Apex behind the scenes, even if your list view if your list view, was every record in your org, then you get to chunk it up into batches of 200 or less. So between 1 to 200. Particularly if you're using quick action, that's exactly the same as using data loader. So if 200 records is bombing out on you, you can just continue to reduce this batch size. But it will get through all the records. So good question.
Next question, what limits would we hit if this is being used to send email?
That follows the same governor limits as workflow email alerts. I don't know what that specific number is, but there is only I don't know, I don't even want to make up a number, but there is some number of max emails that can be sent through workflow. And so you may want to Google what that governor limit is, or look up workflow limits. And that's probably something good for me to go do so I can have it documented. What is max email workflow limit? Okay, good question.
And this might be an enhancement request, but does the schedule handle quarterly? I saw that you were selecting monthly.
Right. At the current moment, the scheduling, like the simple scheduler, just picks an hour of the day, what days of the week, and then which months. So it is very, very trivial. Anything more advanced than that currently, because I wanted to get the app out the door, you would need to use a custom cron expression. And in the Salesforce documentation, if we go to the bottom, fast forward to the bottom, then it has this table that talks about what are the values that you can place in each of the positions, and then it documents what all these special crazy symbols are, so you can do things. Let's look at this one. 0 second of the 0 minute on hour 22, so like 10 p.m. on any day of the week for all months on the last Friday. So here, last Friday of every month at 10 p.m. So you could schedule things to run on, I don't know if it would be quarterly, like, well, maybe the first month. Anyways, you could get gnarly in here figuring these all out. Now, my plans, the roadmap, is to provide more tooling on this page so that we can do those things. So I'll translate your options here into that crazy cron expression. But at the moment, if you don't want to go the cron route, and I've also heard people say they've gone to cronmaker.com and they've put things in here, and it will generate this funky string that you need, and you can just copy and paste that and see if it works. Now, cronmaker can probably create things that Salesforce doesn't support, so you might run into issues there, but you need to double check that with the developer documentation. But good question.
Doug, do you have time to keep going, or should we?
I do, if we're all here.
All right, keep going. Pete asks, what load testing did you do for this? What is the target record set you tested with?
That's a good question. I tested with 3 records. I created the concept. I have not run it through its paces of like hundreds of thousands of millions of records for this specific app, for this Actions API. Now, I've written more than my fair share of scheduled batch code that process hundreds of thousands of records. So I know the mechanics work. The piece that I haven't personally tested is, well, how many records can you pass to Salesforce Actions API before that bombs out? I would trust and believe that the Actions API from Salesforce can handle as much data as we throw to it. Where you're going to find the bottleneck is when you're passing, if your batch size is 200 records. This is where I think you're going to find your limit. You have flow, fire, or process builder fire for 200 records, and Salesforce does its own kind of bulk manipulation behind the scenes. If you have lots of triggers and other processes that are getting kicked off, you might run into either it takes the CPU timeout, it took too long to save the records, or it ended up just the sheer of whatever complexity your org has, it ran too many SQL queries or this, that, the other. But those are all symptoms of what is configured in the org and not the tool. But you do have an option to back things off. And you can think of it conceptually as if I were using Data Loader and I updated 200 accounts or 100 accounts, what happens behind the scenes in my org? How much complexity do I have? If you don't have much complexity in your org, then you can probably keep this batch size high. If you do start to run into those issues, you can back this off. But since it only runs, like the batch apex is only going to queue up as many records as you set here, it doesn't matter how many people are in line. It doesn't matter if you got 30,000 records in line to get processed. We bring them in groups and we process that group, and then we process the next group, and then we process the next group. And so each successful group that gets processed will be saved, and it has everything happen to it. Everyone else that's waiting in line is still waiting, they're unedited. If a particular batch fails, say the next group of 200 gets in and one fails or something, that group may roll back, but the next group or wave that comes in should keep going. But disclaimer, I definitely encourage you to test it out in a sandbox to ensure that the app is meeting your expectations and needs. And if you do run into an issue that you think, hey, it would be cool if, please come back to the project page and open an issue and let me know. We can work through whatever's going on. Good question.
Great. Okay, Liz has a question. Hey, Doug, you mentioned something about a permission set when you first started the demo. Can you talk about that some more?
Permission granted, I shall. In setup, if you go to permission sets, the app installs a permission set called Mass Action Admin, and this simply grants you access to this object, the tab, and all the fields. That is, yep, that's all that it does. It just grants you access to the object and fields for the app. But you do need to assign it to yourself, or you can't get here.
Okay, Mahani, question. I wonder if field updates will someday support SQL queries. Oh, how I love SQL queries.
Yes, it's on my roadmap. I don't know if y'all saw that when I was over on the GitHub page. I want to provide as a source here 2 more sources. They'll be coming. One is a SQL query. So you just write your query. What do you want? Boom, right there. Maybe it's something that can't be expressed with a list view or report. For example, if you wanted to identify all users who have a particular permission or assigned a permission set, reports and list views can't do that for you. So you would need to run a SQL query. The other data source is I want to provide one for Apex. Maybe you need to look up data at runtime to figure out what your filter parameters would be. And again, it's something that you can't express with a report or list view, or even just a literal query. Then you can write an Apex class that will implement an interface, but all you're needing to do is return an iterable. So for the developers in the house, you'll just return an iterable, and then the batch class behind the scenes will just walk through all those records. But again, the benefit there, if we come back to what we were talking about with Apex, is you're staying focused on the niche piece of logic that's needed. You would have one class who has one purpose: return the iterable. What do I want processed? And then you could also have your invocable to say, what is the niche piece of business logic that I want executed? And you may not even have to use both together. You may use Apex to define the SQL query, but have those records evaluated through Flow or Process Builder. Or you may use a report or list view to define the records, but you might need Apex to define what actually happens. Maybe you're going to call out to a web service or something like that. So you'll have all these options to mix and match. Sometimes you can bring Apex in for both sides, none of the sides, etc. Good question.
Okay, Rick asks, can this be used to schedule a JSON upsert from a third-party cloud solution?
I'm going to say yes, but it depends on what let's just throw this example out there and it may or may not work for you. If the records that you want processed can be expressed in that report or list view, then you can use Mass Action Scheduler to schedule, hey, go run this report or list view. These are the records that I want to update in the third party, right? Well, what action do you want to run? Well, you would run either your invocable Apex class, or you might use a flow that is using invocable Apex or other components or connectors of that sort. And in here, you would be handed whatever your batch size of records is. Here's 100 accounts, or here's 200 accounts that need to have something happen to them. In here, you could generate your HTTP request, the JSON serialization of the data, and send that out to the external service. Or you could say, here are my 200 accounts that need to be updated, but the source of the data is Salesforce. Salesforce would be telling Mass Action Scheduler, I need something done to these records. So either you're calling out to the third-party system from here, passing data from Salesforce to the service, or you might just say, hey, service, pull back JSON information, I will deserialize it, and then apply updates to my records here. So you might pass to the system, hey, any changes to these records, let me know, and then I'll update myself. So if you go the Apex route, it's a little more flexible on what's going to happen. Or you could schedule a workflow rule to fire and send an outbound message to the third-party system, and then it would have been given a session ID and can call back to your system whenever it wants, if that makes sense. Good question.
All right, Arnold says, I'd like a process to grab user ID from an associated account team members and populate a user lookup field on the account nightly. One lookup field for each account team member role name. Putting the lookup at the account team member on account enables a lot of reporting and formula fields that we can't do with out-of-the-box account team settings. So which config would I use?
That sounds interesting. Please ask your question on the Trailblazer community so that I can have a little more time to think through that scenario and give you a better answer. I think I would just be mumbling for a few minutes if I tried to answer it on the fly. But I'll follow up on the success community. Thanks.
Yes, remember at mention Doug out there on Salesforce Automation Hour. Are there any limitations for time-based actions from workflow rules?
There are general workflow rule limits on how many time delay scheduled actions you can have, not this scheduled action, but inside, where's the setup page? When you get into, say, workflow rules or process builder to the scheduled action step, if we, not just when it's created, so yeah, created would have worked too. If we come in and edit time-dependent workflow actions, again, you need to Google, I think it's like Salesforce workflow limits maybe. And this should describe time triggers per workflow rule. You can have 10 of those, but how many can you have in your overall? Oh, here's that question. How many emails? 1,000 per Salesforce license. Workflow time triggers per hour. So now this is if you caused your workflow rules to fire, you used Mass Action Scheduler, you updated your records, your workflow rule is fired, and each workflow rule, or the workflow rule that fired, if we come back to here, this workflow rule, if I had a time trigger, and at some point that time trigger said, oh, it's time to go, the alarm went off, at most 1,000 of those can run per hour, okay, across all your workflow rules and time triggers across the entire org. So if your scheduler, the mass action configuration, caused 10,000 records to get updated and they all queued up to have a time trigger fire, it's going to take a while for those to get through. It's going to do 1,000 the first hour, the next 1,000 the next hour, etc. You may be able to contact support to increase that limit. I don't know. But you will get an email to the administrator if you exceeded this, and it just lets you know, hey, there's a lot more left that need to be done. They are being ignored right now. We'll resume, the next hour. Just keep an eye on that. Good question.
Great. I'm just going to ask one more since we're almost hitting on
yeah, I got to go after
30 minutes. And I'll ask everybody else whose question I haven't gotten through to post it out on the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community at Mention Doug, and he'll respond afterwards. So our last question is from Daryl. Is the input for flows a collection variable? So if we wanted records to go separate ways via subflow, could they?
A great question. At the moment, I don't support collection input variables or S-object input variables. So at the moment, I'm just passing in the ID straight from the reporter list view and mapping it to your input variable. So from that perspective, you would need to do a fast lookup in your initial flow first, and then you could call subflows with it from there. It's on my roadmap to try and figure out if that's possible. Like, can it support passing a full S object or a collection? But even if I did, from a collection perspective, I'm not sure if I would say, there's 200 records in the report. Am I trying to collect those 200 records together to pass to the flow once? Or we're just talking about, hey, if you're mapping the account ID to an input variable, that account ID is valid to be mapped to both an S object variable or a text variable. That one is much more feasible than trying to coalesce, 10 or 20, 200 records as a collection into your flow. But I'll be looking at adding S object support for flow input variables. Good question.
Cool. I can't believe there's still 62 people on this call, and we're
Thank
going
you all.
almost at 30 minutes. So great topic, great interest. Again, if we didn't get through your question, please go to the Salesforce Automation Hour Trailblazer community, post it there. Don't forget to @mention Doug so that he could respond. And we will be posting this recording as well as the deck after the session on Automation Hour on our Trailblazer community, and will be available communicated out via Twitter as well and on our YouTube channel. So again, thank you so much, Doug, for kicking us off this year on a great start. And we hope to have you on again.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining.
Happy New Year and have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.